This is an ABC News special report.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We're coming on the air because the jury has now reached a full verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. Jurors had the court scrambling yesterday, you may remember, when they sent a note to the judge saying they had reached a partial verdict on 4 of the 5 counts, but they were stuck on the remaining racketeering conspiracy charge. The judge telling them to keep an open mind. Well, deliberation resumed this morning for a third day. The Combs trial has been going on for nearly 2 months. As you know, graphic testimony, disturbing sexually explicit images. And during yesterday's deliberations, the jury asked for a transcript of ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura's testimony about the 2016 hotel attack that you're seeing here on your screen that was captured on surveillance video in that hotel. That video showing Combs kicking and dragging Cassie in a hallway. Cassie testified she was trying to escape one of those so-called freak-offs when Combs beat her and dragged her back into the room. The jury made up of 8 men and 4 women. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Let's get right to our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky. He is outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, I understand now that Sean Combs has entered the courtroom.
Sean Combs is now seated at the defense table, Kira, with his attorneys. Judge Arun Subramanian has just taken the bench, instructing everyone in the courtroom to maintain decorum when the verdict is reached. It comes after about 14 hours of deliberations over 3 days, and it comes after the jury became stuck on the top charge of racketeering conspiracy, saying they had reached a unanimous verdict on 4 of 5 counts, sex trafficking and transportation for the purposes of prostitution, but had become stuck when it came to the racketeering conspiracy charge. And it's a complicated charge because it required the jury to believe that Combs, if they were to convict, was the leader of a criminal enterprise who relied on his assistants and bodyguards and other employees to commit crimes with him. And there were 8 to choose from. The jury would have to find that Combs agreed to commit at least 2 of those 8 so-called predicate acts. But the judge at the time did not take a partial verdict. He instructed the jury to go back at it. It was too soon to give up. And here now, on the 3rd day of deliberations, after about 14 hours, Kira, the jury has reached a verdict.
And Aaron, I understand that, as I'm being told now, the jury is entering the courtroom. Give us a little bit of color from early this morning. Apparently, Sean Combs was allowed a moment with his family. They prayed together. Tell us about that, Aaron.
This was not the first time that Sean Combs has prayed in the courtroom. The judge was not on the bench. He asked the marshals for permission to speak with his family. There's an entire row in the gallery, the 2nd row of the gallery, reserved for Combs' family members, his mother, twin daughters and sons, all there, other family members in the courtroom as well. And he asked them to hold hands, bow their heads, and pray. And that's when Sean Combs asked for blessings for his family and also for the jury. That jury is now entering the courtroom, Kira.
And I'm told the jury is seated now. Brian Buckmeyer, our legal contributor, I want to bring you in on this. I'm going to have you comment on that in just a second. But let's talk about the RICO charge, the toughest charge here, but would bring the strongest penalty, right?
In a sense, yes. So the racketeering conspiracy, it does have a possibility of a life sentence. The reason why I say in a sense is because the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, that sentencing guideline has a minimum of 15 years to life. So life is a possibility whether or not RICO is met. But I think with the RICO, there's an added issue as well as to automatic forfeiture, because when you are convicted of a RICO conspiracy, the government isn't just looking to incarcerate an individual who participates, or in this case is allegedly the head of that racketeering conspiracy, but also to dismantle that conspiracy or that RICO from a financial standpoint. So all the stuff we heard about Sean Combs' homes and his enterprise and the bank accounts that were used for the sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, if convicted of racketeering conspiracy, that can also be dismantled or taken by the federal government.
And Brian, talk about some of the charges that were dropped. Is it being read right now? Okay, let's go right into the courtroom. Okay, all right. It is being read right now, I am told. Aaron, let's take it back to you as we are now hearing from the judge inside the courtroom.
So the jury, Kira, had to fill out this form, which lists the charges, proven, not proven, the predicate crimes, and whether Sean Combs is not guilty or guilty. On count one, the racketeering conspiracy charge, Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, perhaps the most complicated charge for the jury to understand. The count one had provided for a number of predicate acts, but the jury does not have to get into that because they have found Sean Combs not guilty of leading a criminal enterprise, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy. They will now move to the other 4 counts, 2 of them on sex trafficking and on and we have not guilty now on count 2, which was sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of sex trafficking when it comes to his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. There was a real debate that the jury heard over the course of the last 2 months about consent and coercion and the complications of deciding when an 11-year relationship between Combs and Cassie Ventura may have become a criminal one, and the jury decided it was not criminal sex trafficking when Sean Combs committed what his attorneys freely admitted was domestic abuse, as you saw in that video. He has been found not guilty now on racketeering conspiracy, not guilty on sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He has been found guilty on count 3, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. He has also been found guilty on count 5, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. These charges carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison, so we do have a split verdict. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking Cassandra Ventura, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And we're waiting for one more count, the sex trafficking of Jane. And just now the jury has decided that Sean Combs is not guilty of sex trafficking his former girlfriend who testified under the pseudonym Jane. So the jury has now believed that the relationships that Sean Combs had with his former girlfriends Cassie Ventura and a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane were not criminal, did not involve sex trafficking. All Sean Combs has been convicted of here is transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And Kira, those did seem to be the most evident crimes that Sean Combs committed. We heard testimony from the male escorts. The jury heard about the cash that they were paid, and as prosecutors told them, they were not in those hotel rooms for scintillating conversation. Sean Combs guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking. Kira?
All right, let's put this in perspective now that we know where Sean Combs has been found guilty and non-guilty. Let's put it into perspective, Brian, on time he will serve. What are we looking at now with regard to years? Of course, we should point out there will be an appeal. He's got plenty of money to do that, but let's take it from where it stands right now.
Kira, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. I'm not even sure if I would say there would be an appeal, because for Sean Combs and his defense team, this is a massive win. 3 of the counts that had a life sentence possibility are gone. When it comes to transportation to engage in prostitution, the minimum is nothing. There's a theoretical possibility that he walks out on probation. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, but the max is 10 years. Even if you were to take both sentences, and he's not going to get 10 years, they're going to look at his criminal history, mitigating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and I would assume that he gets somewhere in the middle ground, maybe like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 6 years possible through that sentencing range for each count. Sean Combs going to trial where he was facing life and being able to walk out with something under 10 years, well under 10 years possibly, that is a victory. Will he appeal? Sure, that's his right to do so, but I don't see an appeal here. I think you take this as a win, you serve the few years that you may get, and you be happy that you didn't get life. I'm somewhat shocked as to the trafficking for Cassie. I thought that might have been a stronger case for the government. I didn't think that they had the RICO, and I definitely didn't think they had the Jane trafficking. But this is, I think in only so many words, and I keep saying it, I think this is a positive result for Sean Combs and his team.
I'm being told now Combs is hugging his lawyer at this very moment. Clearly, he's seeing it as you are seeing it as well. You know, we should point out, Brian, let's look at bigger picture here. He is a music producer. He created a brand around himself. He was a big part of bringing hip hop into the mainstream. There is an entire entertainment business side to this. How do you see, from your experience, this win, as you are saying, for Sean Combs? How will it impact his business empire?
I think, for lack of a better term, there was always going to be a blemish on Sean Combs' career. I think people are going to look at this in two different ways. In one way, they're going to say that Sean Combs probably had a history of getting into trouble with the law and somehow getting out from underneath it. They're going to look at past events through both civil and criminal complaints and say, you know what, he's always had good lawyers or whatever it may be, and he's gotten away with bad charges, especially looking at that Intercontinental video. But I think the other view of this is going to be is that he was tried by a jury of his peers. All of the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between was shown to these 12 people, and they did not see the criminal enterprise. They did not see the force, fraud, and coercion. And I think the trafficking to engage in prostitution, I think that's going to be a lighter blemish on his career in terms of the totality of what we saw, as to like, okay, so he paid for people to go across state lines to have consensual sex. And I think consensual sex will be a big part of the conversation based on how the verdict came out. And so do I think he takes a big knock in terms of this case? Yes, but we've seen Sean Combs rebrand and come back from a lot of things, and that is a possibility here.
But let's put it into the context, Aaron Katersky, of the Me Too movement. I don't think anybody can forget the video, the surveillance video that we saw over and over again in that hotel hallway of Sean Combs barely naked in a towel, kicking and dragging Cassie Ventura.
It's an unforgettable piece of video, and it was one of the most visceral pieces of evidence that the jury saw during the course of a nearly 2-month trial, Kira. And the defense freely admitted what's depicted on it is domestic violence, but they said all along he's not charged with domestic violence. The defense insisted, even though the defense did not put on much of a case, called no witnesses, that what was depicted was not sex trafficking, and the jury seems to have agreed. And Sean Combs is clearly taking this outcome of a split verdict, guilty on only the transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges, as a win. The jury has been excused. As the 8 men and 4 women stood to leave their seats, Sean Combs made praying hands in their direction and bowed his head slightly as if to say thank you. When the outcome was read aloud in court, Combs put his hands in the air and looked to the ceiling, clearly taking this as a win that he was acquitted on the most serious charges he faced, Kira.
And now I understand, Aaron, his attorneys are calling for him to actually be released today. Could that happen?
Well, it could happen because he has already served about a year's time, a little shy of a year, and there will be a sentencing date. What the defense is likely arguing is that he is now no longer has anything to do with a violent crime. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, a minimum of nothing. So it will be up to the judge to decide. But where he is no longer accused of a violent crime, the defense may have a good case to get him released until he is formally sentenced. If that happens, it's possible he could walk right out the golden doors here. Certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members of his family were certainly elated. They were not allowed to show any emotion, but they are remaining in the courtroom to see what happens, what the judge ultimately decides, Kira.
Brian, your thoughts on the fact that he could be released today?
So At the beginning of this case, when Sean Combs was charged with sex trafficking, that is a charge that has the assumption that someone should be held pending prosecution. That assumption is gone now because he's been found not guilty of those two charges. And to piggyback off what Aaron is saying, the severity of his punishment has greatly decreased. He's no longer looking at life. He's looking at a max of 10 years on each count. Some of that time he's already served while waiting for this case. Mark Agnifilo, the defense attorney who's leading this case, has said that his private plane is in Maui. He has no access to it. So he's hinting at the idea of a number of things that a judge will consider when thinking about bail. Is this person a flight risk? How serious of a sentence are they looking at? And flight risk goes into two portions. The actual ability to fly and not come back to the jurisdiction, but also the likelihood of doing that. A person who's facing life, more likely to be a flight risk. A person who's just beaten 3 of the 5 top counts in a trial like this and is only facing 10 years, far less of a flight risk. And so while I think it's somewhat of a Hail Mary for him to be released today, this is the strongest possible outcome that he could have had to make this argument. And I think the defense has a leg to stand on in making this argument that Sean Combs should be released pending the sentence.
Let me ask you, Brian, because you and I were talking for days about the videos, just how explicit they were, how Sean Combs treated these women. Listening to Cassie Ventura break down on the stand, listening to other women, former girlfriends, talk about the way he treated women. I brought this question to Aaron, but I want to ask you as well, as someone who's an attorney, someone who has been in the courtroom for cases that involve domestic violence, knowing what we know about what happened and how he treated these women, and now looking at this outcome, how he's been acquitted on the most serious charges, your overall thoughts moving forward about what this says about the Me Too movement, the power of a music mogul when he has money, when he has fame. Your thoughts? So my thoughts, I think, I try to go beyond just being an attorney, and I'll try to sidestep that and just talk as a man, as an adult. I think there can be no mixing of words as to what Sean Combs is when it comes to the treatment of women. Full stop, period. There's no question as to what we saw in terms of the strength of the women who took the stand and testified about the abuse that happened to them. There's no question about the photos we saw of Cassie in terms of the bruising of her body, the bruising of her face, and the violence in that Intercontinental Hotel. Full stop. There's no justification of that. There's no explanation of that. And I think in terms of the Me Too movement, there should be strength in the fact that those women were believed in terms of what they said. Putting my attorney hat back on for a moment, I think the difficulty of this and what may be perceived, and I hope it's a perception and not a reality, of the Me Too movement taking a step back based on this verdict, I think it comes from the overreaching of the government in this case, of trying to fit the allegations of this case into a RICO conspiracy, made it that much less palatable for the jury to take what they were saying to be true. And I think that might have also affected, in some way, shape, or form, the trafficking as well. I'll be honest, I'm somewhat shocked that they did not find Sean Combs guilty of trafficking Cassie because of the violence there. But I think that they made a mistake of not understanding the difference between a brutal domestic violence relationship in which Sean Combs participated in and was in many regards an aggressor of, if not the absolute aggressor of, and trafficking. And I think the overreach and misapplication of what 12 people in the Southern District of New York, or what society would believe to be trafficking in RICO, that misstep and misperception is what led the SDNY here. The SDNY has phenomenal prosecutors, has a phenomenal office, and their record speaks for itself. But I think in this case, they overestimated the strength of their case, and this is what happens when a jury speaks. Aaron, outside court, tell us about who you're seeing. How big of a crowd is it? The sense of the support, if indeed he does walk out of those golden doors, as you said, the type of support he will receive.
Well, out here now, Kira, there are, of course, a number of reporters, a number of bloggers who have been following the trial, curious onlookers, tourists, those in the park across the street doing their morning workout. But everyone is certainly curious whether Sean Combs is going to walk out those golden doors released on bail. His defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told the judge a moment ago Combs would be willing to put up $1 million bail to assure that he shows up for his sentencing. Federal prosecutors just opposed his release on bail, saying that he has committed a litany of crimes and there's no reason to believe he would do anything different if he is released now. Federal prosecutors believe Sean Combs still represents a danger and a risk of flight from justice. They point to the physical violence, even though he was not found guilty of sex trafficking nor charged with any physical violence. They say he has shown a predilection to committing physical violence, as the defense readily admitted. So prosecutors are opposing his release on bail. The judge is going to take a moment to decide.
Brian, your thoughts. Is Sean Combs a risk?
So the question is, a risk of what, right? Would I want Sean Combs to be around any girlfriends or women right now? No, because I think the allegations and the facts have shown that he is a toxic individual who could be very violent towards women. But if you're asking me as to whether or not he's a risk to not come back to court to be sentenced, maybe it's my bias as a defense attorney, and looking at this verdict now, I do not believe he's a risk to not come back to court. I think if anything, he is elated, he is happy, he's excited to come back to court to formulate the best argument for sentencing. And yes, he might spend some years in prison, but the amount of time that he would spend is far less than if he fled and never came back. And he has children here. He has enterprises here. He has at least 60 civil lawsuits that he has to fight. He has, in my mind, and maybe I'm making too strong of an application as a defense attorney, he has far more reasons to stay here and fight now after this verdict than to flee and never come back. And so, do I think he's going to get released? Probably not. That's a high bar to overcome, and I don't think the judge will allow that. But I think there is a very valid and strong argument that he is not a flight risk, and I think there's a possibility, albeit very small, that he walks out of those golden doors.
And Aaron, from what I understand, the judge has now said he is going to take his time to consider if indeed Sean Combs will be released today or not.
He will give a decision today, Kira, but the government and defense attorneys are asking for a period of hours so they can write letters, make their arguments on both sides. So it could be quite a while before the judge decides whether Sean Combs deserves to be released on bail. The government is making the case that he still faces up to 20 years in prison after his conviction on the 2 transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges. But the jury has cleared him of the most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy that could have sent him to prison for life.
Brian, how do you think, what was it that defense lawyers did? What was it that they said? What was it that they had that you think helped deliver a victory for their client?
I think the case against Sean Combs was the first time, at least in me covering the Harvey Weinstein trial, where I was sitting in court, the R. Kelly trial, where I was sitting in court, and many of the cases that I think we would associate with the Me Too movement, where the defense was willing to say, my client is indefensible in some of his actions, that what he did and what you saw is wrong, but making the very strong distinction and walking the very tightrope of saying what he did wrong and what he's being accused of are 2 different things. What we've seen of people in the past of saying, well, they're all lying, you can't trust these women, you can't believe them. I think that's not a way to handle these cases. And I think what the defense did well is in talking to the human aspect of, these are very messy relationships, that Sean Combs is an abuser. And Mark Agnifilo said it himself, if Sean Combs was accused of domestic violence, there would not be a trial because he would plead guilty. Do I think that's a bit of showmanship? Yes. Do I think that would actually be true? Maybe, maybe not. But I think arguing it nonetheless in front of a jury and admitting to some of the bad facts and trying to parse through it all, I think it gave them credibility to get to this verdict.
Let's bring in our Bernarda Villalona, who's been also with us as an attorney, as a contributor here at ABC News. You and I have been talking every day for months now about this case. Bernarda, I asked Brian this question as an attorney who has been involved with domestic violence cases. I want to ask you as well your thoughts on what this means for the victims.
For the victims, I think this is a slap in the face for the victims. I think this is going to deter victims from coming forward and telling their story and being the voice for the voiceless in the sense of representing other victims that are not willing to come forward. I know that for a fact, I'm sure that the prosecution right now is very upset with this verdict because they definitely put a lot of time into this prosecution, into this investigation. And they also did a lot of comforting of trying to give strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to come forward, to show their face, to share their story. And this is not just like any other regular domestic violence case or just any type of abuse case. You're dealing that they were stepping forward to speak against a music mogul, a person who had the key to New York City, one of the most powerful people in the industry. So just think of how scared they were to come forward and to tell their story and scared of what could happen once they came forward. Because I'm sure with social media and people talking in the news that they have received a lot of threats and people commenting about who they are and what they've done and that they are liars. But they and they alone know what happened to them. And they had prosecutors that believed in them and believed their story and became their voice.
Aaron, I understand court has now been adjourned. Combs was escorted out. A massive applause was heard from within the courtroom.
The judge said court is adjourned for now, Kira. He's going to give the parties until 1 p.m. Eastern Time to submit letters arguing for or against his release on bail. The judge left the bench until later on this afternoon when he'll give his decision. Once the judge was off the bench, Sean Combs was escorted out by the marshals. The judge told him he's going to have to cool his heels in the courthouse for a bit. But as he left the courtroom, there were applause from the gallery, some cheers in the gallery where members of his family have been in steadfast vigil. His mother here most days, his twin daughters back, his sons have been here most days. They cheered for their father after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faces, still convicted of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And now we await the decision as to whether he's going to be released on bail. If he is, he will walk out to a crowd that includes people holding up Sean John T-shirts and other supporters who have been here saying, "Where's the Rico?" They've been shouting that into the street for weeks, and they would certainly welcome this verdict if he is to walk out those golden doors, Kira. For the jury, they really had to make a difficult decision, not just on the racketeering conspiracy, but as the defense said, the women that Combs was accused of trafficking were also his long-term girlfriends. Cassie Ventura with him for 11 years, Jane with him for more than 3 years. And the defense tried to argue that they were consensual relationships, that they were in it just as much as he was because that was their lifestyle, even though they freely admitted the polyamorous swingers kink was not everybody's cup of tea. But he said these women were in it, and it required the jury to make distinctions between consent and coercion and love and control and free will, and in the end they acquit on the most serious charges that carried a minimum sentence of 15 years, acquitting on sex trafficking in addition to the racketeering conspiracy, Kira.
Bernard, I want to bring you back in on that. As Aaron was saying, this really came down to violence and fear versus love, infidelity, and jealousy. We are watching the doors now to see if lawyers will be coming out and coming to the mics. But Bernarda, Sean Combs may be acquitted of the most serious charges here. But let's talk about the impact all of this will have on ongoing civil cases.
Yes, so you have to think, so even though he was acquitted of the most serious charge in this criminal case, when we're talking about a civil case, it's a different burden. The criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. When you're dealing with civil cases, it's by a preponderance of the evidence, 51% versus 49%. But then again, with a civil case, he's just at risk of losing his empire in terms of money, but his liberty is no longer at stake. So he can live to fight those cases outside of jail bars.
You bring up a good point, because if he would have been found guilty of racketeering, that could have forced him to forfeit all his businesses, right?
Absolutely. So if he would have been found guilty of racketeering conspiracy and of the sex trafficking, anything that was used in order to facilitate this crime. So for example, his mansions in Florida and his mansion in Los Angeles would have been at risk that it would have been taken away from the government, since there was evidence that was put forth having to deal with that some of the sex trafficking took place inside of those homes. So he would have been at risk of losing that, and also a lot of his businesses and his money.
In his closing argument, one of Combs' defense attorneys asked jurors to summon the courage to acquit Combs, who conceded he could be violent, jealous, and a drug user, but whose lawyers argued the case is badly exaggerated to make Combs like something he is not. Do you think that's what happened, Brian Buckmeyer?
I don't know. This one I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, and I apologize. I'm trying to get information from different people as I go about this, trying to get information from people inside the court. I think, let me try to put it into words. I think when it comes to this case, this might have been more about how the case was handled than the actual people who testified. I could see how this might be an indictment on the women who testified, and I would say, as someone who watched them, I don't think it should be. I think, if anything, this is about how the case was handled by the government in terms of how they argued it, how they presented it, and the people that were selected. People even selected being the jurors, not the team themselves. And so I think as we move forward with this case and we see what's going to happen, because there is a possibility, although small, that Sean Combs walks out today, I think we just take stock of what we heard, what was argued, and what the result was, and not lay this at the feet of anyone who testified.
And now I understand, Aaron, a statement has been given on behalf of Cassie Ventura, star witness in this case. What are you learning?
Her attorney, Doug Wigdor, just sent us the following statement. This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November 2023. And Kira, we should say that's true. The criminal investigation is largely based on the statements in Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, and intensified, of course, once video from the 2016 hotel security camera became public. The statement from Doug Wigdor, her attorney, goes on to say, although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie's attorney, Doug Wigdor, goes on to say, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial. She testified for 4 days, often quite emotionally so, giving graphic, explicit detail of what she said she was made to do. And Sean Combs did not deny the facts of the freak-offs. Everything that happened in those hotel rooms did not get challenged by the defense. The defense simply saw it differently, as something that went on in a personal, consensual relationship, not sex trafficking. And that's how the outcome is reflected now, Kira.
Bernardo, I want to go on to read another part of that statement on behalf of Cassie Ventura's attorney, saying she displayed unquestionable strength and brought attention to the realities of powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that has persisted for decades without repercussion. This case proved that change is long overdue, and we will continue to fight on behalf of survivors. Two things that stood out to me: powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that persists, and change that is long overdue. Your thoughts?
Power and money. You can buy yourself out of a conviction. Let's be honest that if Sean Combs wasn't able to get the team that he got and pay for that defense team and experts and investigators to help defend himself, that we would have had a different outcome today. But money and power, that you can still get away with crimes if you have money and power. But I have to say, I was in the courtroom for Cassie's testimony, and she was a strong, strong witness. You can tell that the courage that she had, the strength that she exhibited. I mean, when she spoke and when she would cry from time to time, when she revisited those freak-offs and when she revisited those times when Sean Combs brutally beat her, and to see her in court sitting down, showing the strength and courage that she was able to overcome this. I think one of the most strongest moments that brought people to tears is when she said at some point that she went home and she told her husband, "You can do this without me," and that she wanted to cross the street and commit suicide because of what she had been through. But I'm glad that Cassie has been able to pick herself up and has been able to move on, taking it day by day, because it does show the strength that she got as a result of coming forward. That coming forward helped to bring closure to her.
Bernarda, thank you. Aaron, getting more insight from Sean Combs inside that courtroom, saying this coming from journalists in the press room. He was overcome with emotion as the verdict was read. His feet were visibly shaking throughout the reading of the verdict.
He has been an emotional defendant throughout the entire case. In fact, at one point, the judge had to admonish his attorney that Combs was gesturing and trying to make eyes with jurors as if to attempt to influence them when they were hearing certain testimony. And the judge made him sit straight and silent throughout much of the testimony. But as the verdict was being read, he started gesturing. He got down on the floor after it was over to kneel in prayer. Applause broke out into the courtroom. And I'm struck, Kira, the crowd has gathered here outside, and in the windows of the upper floors, courthouse employees are peering down to look at the streetscape below as more people rush toward these doors in anticipation of a possible release on bail sometime later on today, Kira.
And as we wait to hear what the outcome of that is, of course, if indeed the judge decides he could be released today. Brian Buckmeyer, let's talk about the jury makeup here and how it influenced this case, you think. We talked about the fact that it was 8 men, 4 women. Your thoughts on the number of men in this case versus women, and how you see that influencing what happened here?
Yes, I know oftentimes when we look at jurors, we look at race or gender. And yes, there's a possibility that the number of men in this case could have been beneficial to Sean Combs in terms of trying to decide what this relationship was like. But I think probably more importantly than race or gender would be age. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to the conversation as to whether or not these were consensual relationships, which appears to be at the heart of the jury's verdict in terms of saying, yes, we saw that you brought these people across state lines for prostitution, but we don't believe there was force, fraud, or coercion for trafficking, and we don't believe that there was a criminal enterprise or that there was not 2 predicate acts. Right? I think a large part of the not believing comes down to consent. And what I find, at least when I talk to a jury or just talk to people in general, is there's a big divide in terms of what is consent when you talk to someone who is over the age of 40 or 45 and under the age of 40 or 45. And when you have a jury where more than half of them are 51 years to 74 years old, and even if you go even below that, there's a number of people who are in their 40s, I think the conversation and the argument that Mark Agnifilo and his team were having about what it means to consent works for people in that age demographic. I think if we had a jury that was predominantly in their 20s or early 30s, this argument of consent would be very different. So while I do see that there is value in looking at the gender or the sex of the jurors, I think the age told us a lot more based on the arguments we saw.
Bernarda, you think it was smart that Sean Combs did not take the stand?
Absolutely, absolutely. If Sean Combs would have taken the stand, this case would have become a deliberation of whether this jury believed what Sean Combs had to say, whether his demeanor came off as one as credible. Also, you have to think if Sean Combs were to testify, there was a lot of evidence that the prosecution was not able to get in their case in chief because they were missing a link, and that link would have been Sean Combs. So they would have been able to get that evidence in had Sean Combs testified. So it would have changed the deliberation process, and we would have probably been looking at a completely different verdict. Also got to think, how would he be able to explain in terms of the brutal beating of Cassie and of Jane on that particular occasion?
Aaron, do you think we'll hear from the family? Sean Combs' mother, Janice, was in the courtroom along with his sons, his daughters. Are they expected to speak? Do you think they will speak?
I'm not sure. They haven't yet during the course of this trial, but the cars that they've been using to transport themselves to and from the courthouse are now pulling up to the front here, and they should be walking out those golden doors any moment. They may opt to wait until they know whether Combs is going to get released on bail, as his defense attorney argued he should be. And Combs almost seemed confident that the judge would grant it. He mouthed and said aloud to members of his family in the gallery, "I'm coming home, baby," after the split verdict here, acquitting him of the most serious charges, but finding him guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And because that is not a violent crime, the defense said that he has earned the right to get released on $1 million bail, as Combs offered to put up.
Aaron, we talk about the support outside of the courthouse there, the cheers that were heard from inside the courtroom. We should point out it's because he had his mom and his kids inside that courtroom. But if you want to talk about people showing up to support Sean Combs throughout all of this, the only celebrity that we witnessed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that came to show support was Kanye West.
That's right, and what a moment that was. The family now is coming out. You can see the mother of Sean Combs waving and giving a thumbs up. His sons walking out as well. Twin daughters. You can hear perhaps the cheers from some of the supporters, if you can hear them over the hum of the traffic. There were supporters in the courtroom throughout, a few outside, but only Kanye West showed up to court, and when he walked in his all-white suit, he said he was here to support Sean Combs, but he never saw him. He was not allowed inside the courtroom itself. He watched about 10 minutes of the proceedings inside an overflow room and was in and out of the courthouse in about 20 minutes, and we're not sure whether he was invited or not, or showed up of his own volition. There really haven't been that many supporters apart from his family that just left court, as you can see, waving and giving a thumbs up moments ago. Sean Combs has been largely left alone with members of his family, including the mother of at least one of his children. His twin daughters were here at the beginning. They came at the end. His sons were here throughout the case, as was his mother. And when the jury came back stuck yesterday, Combs turned to his mother and said, "It's going to be okay." And today, after the outcome, he turned to his family and said, "I'm coming home, baby."
Bernardo, let me pull something out of what Aaron just said. Sean Combs was largely left alone through all of this. We're talking about somebody that was a huge businessman, a music mogul, a producer, a huge part of making hip hop mainstream. He threw these lavish parties. He was always pointed to at big events and galas. The fact that Aaron said he was largely left alone, what does that tell you?
And he was. I was in a courtroom for the entire trial with the exception of one day. And literally the only person who showed up was Kanye. And the jury didn't get to see Kanye because he was in an overflow room. But in terms of being left alone, Kira, are you surprised? When you look at that video, the Intercontinental video, there's no running from it. And artists and celebrities, they wanted to run away from that because they didn't want to be associated with that type of violence. So it came down to money.
Bernarda, thank you. Aaron, want to take it to you as we reach the top of the hour here. We now wait to see if indeed the judge makes a decision. He says he will make it today if he will allow Sean Combs to be released and walk out those doors behind you.
The judge gave them several hours to make written arguments before he issues a decision on release on bail. But Sean Combs is already celebrating after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faced that could have sent him to prison for life. He was convicted of transporting people for the purposes of prostitution, but taking that as a win, even though in theory he still faces up to 20 years in prison, Kira.
And acquitted of the most serious charges. Bernarda, Brian, Aaron, thank you. We're going to return you now to your regular programming. For some of you, that is Good Morning America, but I do want to tell you about an ABC News special verdict, the Diddy trial, that will air tonight, 10 Eastern. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. The entire team will be here for World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm Kira Phillips. Thanks for staying with us.
This has been a special report from ABC News.